Okay, we're going to work on social self. I really love this reading. I wish that I had this sooner than later in life, just because I was like, oh man, that makes a lot of sense on how I recognize who I am within society. Okay, all right, so the self is not created in isolation. Who we are and how we identify or create our existence in any way, shape, or form is very much influenced by the people we hang around, society itself, television, TVs, and television, TV, the same thing. Um, you name it. Social media, for sure. How we want to portray ourselves, how we portray ourselves based on how we think others will perceive us, right? So it kind of goes hand in hand. Anyway, so first and foremost, we're going to cover the vocabulary. That was the one thing I just really wanted you to pay attention to have an understanding, because you're going to use it in your discussion. So, looking glass self, this is how we see ourselves based on how others see us. If I'm telling jokes and you're laughing, I perceive myself as funny, right? If I get compliments on my clothes, I might think I'm fashionable. Okay, so how we see ourselves is how we see others seeing us, if that makes sense. So, majority of the time, we care more about those that are closest to us and how they think of us than those outside of us. But at the same time, it depends on how close these people are within proximity of how we are going to interact, if that makes sense. So, like my husband, I based on his like how he talks to me is how I perceive myself. So if he says I'm really beautiful, I'm like, oh, I must be beautiful. Or if he says I'm really smart and funny, oh, I must be smart and funny. Like, I take his opinion more so than if someone across the world was making comments about me. I'm like, bitch, you don't know me, right? I mean, if it's a compliment, I'll take any compliment. But you know what I mean? So, like, we care about what other people say. How we perceive ourselves is how we assume others see us, if that makes sense, or how we assume others see us. Anyway, okay. Labeling bias. Remember that video about the scientist and how he told that some rats were smart and some rats were dumb, and how that there was an actual, even though the rats were exactly the same, there was nothing different about them. The smart rats went through the mazes a lot better than the quote unquote dumb rats, which is wild because that would have been an impossibility. Like, it doesn't make sense. How is that possible? Well, the idea here is that it's the way in which we perceive, right, where we label these rats actually contributed to the ways in which they performed. And that's how it is in life. When we have a labeling bias towards ourselves or people doing that to us, it affects us pretty much in a negative way. I am trying to think of when there's a labeling bias that is positive, because anyway, so just consider that. I guess with the rats, when they thought of the rats as smart, there was that, and then it created the rat. The rats did better. I don't know what they would have done if they didn't label them at all, because that would have been a good control, right in the middle, where you could see how a rat without any good or bad, how it would have performed versus having the two. So anyway, that's science. That's a whole different thing. Anyway, so just consider that when we're affected by that labeling, rarely positively, mostly negatively, but just be mindful of that when we're either labeling other people's or when we recognize people are labeling us. Okay, self-labeling. Again, that's something where we adopt others' labels explicitly into our own self-concept. So, how am I labeling myself? Well, maybe like in high school, I brought this up before, where like in high school as a cheerleader, I took on the label. I mean, I was a cheerleader, but I took on the label so that I felt like a part of, because otherwise I didn't know what I was doing in high school. So I took it on, even though like now, like I don't know if I would take on that label. At the time, I chose it because I'm like, that's how I feel who I am. Um, in this environment, in this community, in this time, right? So, self labeling is just helping us to try and figure out who we are as people. And it can change, absolutely. As we go through life and we experience different things, we can go, I don't know, I guess I label myself now as a teacher. I mean, that's what I do. But I find that because that's what I do, it bleeds into other things that I do and how I handle situations, how I have conversations with people. Maybe it's because it's in practice. I do it all day, every day, which is fine. But again, that's a self labeling on how I act outside of class, right? I'm like, well, I'm a teacher, right? I throw that on myself. And, there could be other things like if I were to think that I was funny, oh, I think I'm funny, and that's how I, label myself. I don't really think that at all. But it could be something in which I label myself. So anyway, just think about that, different ways in which we label ourselves on our own versus that other people put on us. Okay, internalized prejudice. So this happens. Okay, so when we read Wild Meat and the Bully Burgers, absolutely you saw that internalized prejudice from Lovey. And Lovey hated herself, hated her hair, hated her skin, hated her culture, hated her food, hated where she lived, all this stuff. By the way, she lived in Hawaii, but you do you, so here she had all this internalized hate because all she was seeing outside of her was Shirley Temple. And Lovey didn't look anything like Shirley Temple. And so here she just felt like she must be terrible because she doesn't look like who's out there. This is why representation is really important so that, people can go, oh, there I am. I see myself. I could be successful too, right? So it's just important to be mindful that, we see ourselves out there in some way, shape, or form. Individuals turn prejudice directed towards them from others onto themselves, right? So if they see the prejudice, they take it on and go, maybe they're right. There must be a reason. Like society as a whole has this thing against me. Maybe it's true. So I guess I hate myself. And then that's how we internalize these things. Okay. Social comparison. I think you can kind of see where this one is going. It's when we learn about our abilities and skills and about the appropriateness or the validity of our opinions or about a relative's social status by comparing our own attitudes and beliefs and behaviors with those of others. Okay, so sometimes social comparison is not a bad thing. It's just us trying to figure out who are we based on our community and who we're around and, what we like, what we don't like. And, sometimes we, consider what our opinions and our, what's appropriate based on who we're around. Like if you go to a, like a wedding and you're wearing white and you're not the bride, when we have social comparisons, some people might go, oh man, that's wildly inappropriate. And then others are like, oh, who cares? It's, the bride doesn't care. Why should they care? Right. So it depends on, the social, interactions in which you are a part of, right? Your community or however. So, and again, we talked about social construct a couple weeks ago. It's that same idea, right? Like social comparison, social construct, what are we following? What works? What doesn't? And how do we compare ourselves to that, right? Like, am I doing, like if a social comparison as a teacher compared to other teachers, like how am I doing? I don't do that because that'll just destroy me. Like we all got to do our own thing. Right. And so that's the other thing. There's that balance. Like at what point do we use this social comparison to be better in some way, be more considerate in some way, understanding what our status is and our attitudes and our beliefs and our behaviors and that sort of thing. I think a rule of thumb is, if what you're doing is hurting someone else, maybe don't do it. But then at the same time, like, at what point are we hurting all, right? So this is like, and this is where it's hard because you're in a society where you're like, well, this hurts someone, but it doesn't hurt this person. Blah! Trust me, I know. All day, every day, I think this. So anyway, these are just things to consider. Don't break your brain over it. Just be considerate as to the best of your abilities is, what we're trying to do here. Anyway, downward social comparison. So this is when we attempt to create a positive image of ourselves through favorable comparisons of others who are worse off than we are. Right? Well, at least I'm not dying. Right? That's, that is a downward social comparison. Here's me up here. Well, at least I'm not that guy. Okay, so that's the downward social comparison. So when you're doing your discussion, you can use as an example. When did you use downward social comparison? Hey, at least I'm not that guy. Okay. We also have upward social comparison. Okay, and so this is when we compare ourselves with others who are better than us. So sometimes, and like, the world is gray, y'all, so everything's different. So the reason why I say this is sometimes upward social comparison is okay because we're like, oh man, look at this athlete. I want to try and be like that. And so we follow their steps and we try and become good athletes. Sometimes it makes us better people. Sometimes it makes us hate ourselves, right? Especially when you follow people on Instagram and influencers and like, oh, I want that life. And the problem with that is we don't know really truly the life that they live to want to be who they are. The same thing is when we do a downward social comparison. Sometimes, at least I'm not that guy. Sometimes it's like gratitude, right? That creates a sense of gratitude. But at the same time, is it making us feel like we're better than that person? I don't know. This is just understanding who we are in a society and identity. Okay. So again, sometimes that social comparison is like, that person is inspirational and I want to strive to be them. All right. Set reasonable goals. Okay. So if you're following people who are Olympians, good luck. These people have been doing this since they were 3. So I love that stuff. I wish I could say I was that dedicated to anything in this world. So anyway, again, downward social comparisons. How and what we're doing, is it making others feel bad to make ourselves feel good? How is it maybe something we need to do so that we can understand gratitude, so we can be happier through life? I don't know. That's up to you. Okay. Self-presentation. Absolutely love this one, because this is pretty much how we present ourselves to people out there. Look at me today. I love coffee and I got my hat on. So I don't know. This is not a good self presentation, but it is what it is. Y'all, we've been doing this long enough. So it's the tendency to present a positive self image to others with the goal of increasing our social status. I don't think I'm doing that great of a job unless you like coffee, but or surfing. This is Santa Barbara surf boards down in. Anyway, so self-presentation, it's the goal of increasing our social status, and it can be manipulative and it can be honest. So I guess I could have probably tried a little harder on this one to really show my, my presentation on who I really am. This is really who I am. So this is my real true self right here. How do you do that? How do you present yourself outside of, in the world? And do you do it to be manipulative? Do you do it to be honest? And it's okay. This is not, a lot of times we use that word manipulation to be like a terrible, negative connotation, but maybe it's just what we need to do for self-preservation. I don't know. So just think about that. Like, how do you present yourself outside in the world? And what's your intent behind it? So I don't know. That's up to you, not me. Anyway, so just consider that, like, as you're getting dressed for the day, like, what is your intent behind that? So, okay. And then last but not least, self-monitoring. So self-monitoring is changing who we are to fit in. I'm not saying good or bad on that. Sometimes we need to change who we are to fit in, just maybe, again, out of respect, or maybe out of necessity, maybe just because we want to fit in, or, who knows? It's to each their own. This is just your own. I just want you to be self-aware. That's all this is. So the tendency to be both motivated and capable of regulating your behavior to meet the demands of social situations. So self-monitoring, some people need to do to create safety. Some people choose not to because they don't, feel like they need to, or you don't care or don't have to, right? So that's a question to ask yourself. Like, at what point do you do self-monitoring? And, sometimes maybe for me as a teacher, I should do a little more self-monitoring, but at the same time, I'm like, I'm also just true to who I am in myself. And, not to say you get what you get, but that's kind of where I'm at. I'm very tired. I'm sure you're all very tired too, but I'm tired of putting up, pretenses and all this stuff. So it's like, for my self-monitoring, I try, I don't know if I do that so much. Maybe I need to do a little bit more. I don't know. It's a growth. Anyway, so when we're talking about the social self, who are we in society? That's it. And that's all I want you to check with yourself, is who are you in society? And again, none of this is meant to be good or bad. This is purely just a journey to ask yourself questions like, this is what I do and this is what I don't do, and that kind of thing. So anywho, I just want you to be mindful. That being the case, while you're just kind of figuring out yourself, make sure you get on that rough draft. I don't know if any of this will help you in your rough draft, but it will be due next week. So if you have questions, please go ahead and reach out to me. Final projects will be due on week 17, okay? And I just want you to know that I'm here for support, but I can only give so much. I do need you to work yourselves, do some of the work yourselves. And the reason why I'm stalling for a second, I'm going to check the calendar. Um, our rough draft is due next week, and then on week 14, I'm giving you some time to also do more work for your source summary number 2 and to start revising your rough draft. So source summary number 2 will be due week 15. By the way, we're in week 12, so that tells you how many weeks you'll have for it. And then week 16 is to finally finish your paper. And then week 17 is your presentation. I'll give a little bit more on that, but how do you want to present this information to your peers? Do you want to do a PowerPoint? Do you want to do video? Whatever. I don't know. So, all right. The neighbor kid downstairs screaming, and that's fine with me because I just want to finish this up anyway. So, I think that is my sign to go. Ladies and gentlemen, have fun, and I will see you on the other end.